Today I'm going to read an excerpt from an American Civil War journal written in 1863. So 3 years into the Civil War. Its author, James Miller, was a Christian. And this journal entry is his opinion on the war's impact on Christianity. Not Christianity's impact on the war, but the war's impact on Christianity. First of all, some background. James Miller became fully involved in the war after a group of Christians decided to help the soldiers following the devastation that resulted from the first major battle of the Civil War, called the First Battle of Bull Run. Now, Bull Run is a little river in Virginia, about 25 miles from Washington, D.C., hence the name First Battle of Bull Run. So that's the location, Virginia. This first major Civil War battle showed everybody, hey, this isn't going to be a short war like we all thought it was going to be. Now, kids learn all about this in school, but what they don't learn, because there's just really no time, is that one of the results of the devastation of this first battle was that a group of Christians came together and formed the United States Christian Commission. Now, these were civilians, so no rifles, no cannons. They just wanted to help in non-combat roles. So they provided fresh food to the soldiers, they taught black soldiers, and they also tried to spread the Christian gospel on the battlefield. There's even a museum dedicated to their memory, the Christian Commission, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And it was during his service with the United States Commission that James Miller wrote, "The Southern ministry are rebels." Now, rebels, you got to keep in mind, he wrote this using the vernacular of the time. So concerning the South, he said, before the war, the soul of their religion was slavery. He said, in contrast to Jesus, who preached the gospel to the poor, they, in essence, preached chains and bondage. During the war, these same ministers have given all the sacred influence and powers of their office toward rebellion, and the churches have been hotbeds of treason. He wrote, how could we expect such to flourish or to enjoy the smiles of heaven? How can we wonder if God in his wrath wipes them out and leaves nothing but a moral waste over the whole South? It is sad to contemplate, but the picture is not exaggerated. Then he asked, what about the northern churches? Talked about what's going on in the South. What about the northern churches? He said the northern churches are prosperous. But he said they've reduced Christianity to sort of kind acts or kindness and patriotism. He wrote this, nothing interests the North but war. Nothing feeds but the excitement of the hour. Yes, we may well fear that at home in the North, as well as the South, true religion is suffering from the war. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, simply that he believed that people were more interested in their political wills, in realizing their political wills, than they were in the will of God. In other words, nobody was asking, hey, has anybody bothered to ask what God thinks about what we're doing here? No, they were saying more like, help us beat the other guy, God. Most people, he said, didn't show interest in spiritual things because the war was all-consuming. As if it were, now get this, coming between man and God. That is, separating humanity from God. In other words, the war was winning. So after he critiques the churches in the North and South, he records his thoughts about religion in the army. What does that look like? He wrote, wickedness is rampant here, and many souls have been stained with the foulest spot and deepest crime. I shudder for my country when I see what a flood of sin has swept over the host of her defenders. I shudder to think of the time when these men will go home bearing the dregs of this pollution, which they will entail about their children, I shudder for the peace of our homes, the security of virtue, and the safety of the morals of our people. Now he's talking about mostly young men. Half of the soldiers in the Civil War were less than 23 years old. Half. About 75% of them were less than 29 and a half. So who were these young people? One Civil War veteran wrote, "Why I and the other fellows came to enlist is something I could never explain. I think I am safe in saying that at the moment, genuine patriotism hardly entered into the question. Now, of course, there were some who enlisted from patriotic motives, but when it comes down to the bottom facts, I believe the majority of the boys were induced to go for other motives." So what were these other motives? He says, most probably it was the general excitement of the times. It was simply a craze, an excitement to go to the war. And listen closely to this. He says, to many, it was just a change from the ordinary humdrum of life. Wow, they were just bored. He says, to others, it was looked upon as a picnic, and then in everybody's heart. And he said, and then in every boy's heart, there is an inherent spirit of adventure. And this is from The Young Volunteer, The Everyday Experiences of a Soldier Boy in the Civil War, published in 1906, page 26. Has a lot of good examples of what life was like for the young soldiers. But anyway, James Miller, he sees the different ways the adventure-seeking young people react to a prolonged war. I mean, we're not talking about an elite Roman legion here. These are young boys who, in some cases, they abandoned the fight. They didn't take orders well. They committed atrocities, etc., etc. So as an eyewitness, Miller writes, quote, "Yes, my country, I tremble for when I see how wickedness abounds and God's heritage," he means the earth, "is laid waste. It will take 50 years to wipe out the stains that this war will leave upon our moral condition." Some say longer than that, right? But then Miller looks overseas to opine about the lack of a consideration of God in human affairs. He looks to France and says, plunged into revolutions and carried away with excitement, religion was banished. France tried to work the world without a God. Her example is before us. The awful thunderbolts of divine justice hurled upon the devoted land and her streets drenched with blood. Let us take warning. We are in imminent danger. All the efforts of Christians should be aroused to redeem the nation. Call it not idle talk. It is truth. Don't say, there's no danger. No danger of that happening here like it happened in France. He says, for the danger is great and imminent. Pray, Christians, and work. Men may laugh as they please and call us Puritans and fogies, old fogies. But the church, however Puritan and fogey, is now imminently the hope of the nation's salvation. He says, arise then and work. Let not religion be dishonored, for then our beautiful and human theory of self-government, with all our institutions of philanthropy and benevolence, will become baseless as the fabrics of our dreams. And so there he quotes Shakespeare, right? Fabrics of our dreams, it's like a cloud, it's going to dissolve. The future literally hangs in the balance, will go from bad to worse. And then he says, and this splendid edifice, reared and dedicated to truth, liberty, and God, will totter to its fall. It's like a large building collapsing. Now, he insists that there are great moral principles being worked out in this war, which from the standpoint of Christianity is not simply a physical war, but also a spiritual war. So that the moral principles, he says, are part of religion. So he says, pray God to save us from the evils which threaten us. The hopes of humanity, of liberty, and of religion itself are resting on the security and purity of our nation's religious faith. And that's how he ended this entry on his perspective of the impact of the American Civil War on Christianity. Thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe to find out when the next podcast is loaded.